Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. We're excited for this roundtable, and Michael will kick it off, and we'll also have a recording of this that you can share with your colleagues.
Definitely. Thank you, sir. And a warm welcome to all of our webinar attendees, and thanks for joining us today. Certain that the next hour will be well worth your time. We have a really awesome expert panel that's been put together to discuss the present state of technology in the laboratory industry, and then what the future will look like as innovation and emerging technologies take hold. Now, the goal of today's discussion is to help our laboratory colleagues prepare for the future and also move forward with confidence after gaining a better understanding of the tech tools now available and the innovation on the horizon. Today, you'll hear from a collection of experts with varied backgrounds who all believe that the most successful clinical labs and pathology groups will be driven by technology. These tech-enabled labs will enjoy lower operational costs and increased productivity, and the technology will allow them to become market leaders who are better able to attract and also retain more customers and improve net collections. Please also note that we've set aside some time at the end of this webinar for a question and answer session, and we welcome your questions and interaction throughout this discussion. Please submit your questions via the chat function during the Zoom call. So now let's introduce our expert panel. First, let's introduce Bruce Friedman, Professor Emeritus, University of Michigan Medical School. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you.
Stan Schofield, Managing Principal of the Compass Group. Welcome, Stan. Khosrow Shotabani, President, Executive Director, Project Santa Fe Foundation and Lab 2.0. And Dennis Winston, President, Dennis Winston and Associates, Healthcare Systems Consultants. Our moderator for today's discussion, Suren Avunjan, LigoLab's co-founder and CEO. So gentlemen, again, thanks for taking the time. A very warm welcome to you all. We really look forward to this discussion. And first, we'll start off with Suren. He'll have some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the warm intro. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and fellow professionals in the field of laboratory science, it's a pleasure and an honor to welcome you all to today's discussion with this all-star lineup of industry thought leaders and members of the LigoLab Advisory Board on the current state of technology and its impact on future laboratories. As we gather here today, we stand at a precipice of a new era in the laboratory industry, driven by rapid advancements in technologies that promise to revolutionize the way we work, collaborate, and innovate. In recent years, we've witnessed a digital transformation across various industries, and the field of laboratory business is no exception. From artificial intelligence to laboratory automation and digital pathology, technology has profoundly shaped the landscape of modern laboratories. Today, clinical laboratories are experiencing disruption due to various factors, such as technological advancements, regulatory changes, and evolving healthcare landscapes. Laboratories of the future will increasingly resemble technology companies as they leverage advanced tools and systems to improve efficiency, accuracy, and collaboration. To build a solid foundation for this vision, laboratories must consider the following several key factors. Laboratories need to invest in the state-of-the-art equipment, software, and hardware to stay at the forefront of technological advancements. Future laboratories must implement robust data management systems to handle the growing volume and complexity of lab-generated data, decision-making, and to unlock valuable insights. Michael, can we get next slide, please? To facilitate seamless data exchange and collaboration, laboratories must prioritize interoperability and standardization. To accelerate innovation and stay ahead of the curve, laboratories should actively seek partnership with technology companies and other stakeholders in the industry. Laboratory of the future must be agile and adaptable, ready to embrace new technologies and methodologies, and a business model as they emerge. This requires a flexible organizational structure and an open-minded culture, and a willingness to transform with novel approaches. By focusing on these key factors, laboratories can establish a strong foundation for their future vision as a technology-driven organization, well-equipped to navigate the rapidly evolving landscape of laboratory technology innovation. As we delve deeper into our roundtable discussion today, we'll explore the current state of laboratory technology and examine the most promising emerging trends poised to reshape the future of lab. We'll also discuss the challenges and opportunities that these innovations may present and the strategies that can help us harness their full potential in pursuit of excellence. Together, let us embark on a journey to envision the laboratory of the future, a space where cutting-edge technology, human ingenuity, and a relentless pursuit of knowledge converge to push the boundaries of what is possible. Thank you all for joining the roundtable today, and let us begin our exploration into what we need to do today to be better prepared for tomorrow's exciting world of emerging technologies and their impact on the future laboratory world. So with that, I'd love to kick it off with Stan and find out, in terms of market trends, what are the top laboratory issues today and for the next 5 years as you see it?
Thank you, Søren. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and friends and colleagues that have joined us today, welcome. I would say, well, first of all, the lab has just plenty of challenges, but probably the top three today and going into 5 years is going to be around staffing, automation, and reimbursement. You know, today, staffing, there's fewer staff. The lower technical skill sets are available for potential employees. Many of us are training our own staff as laboratory technicians or machine operators. The world of having clinical laboratory scientists at every workstation is very, very difficult, if not impossible these days. Costs are very significant around labor pools, and being able to attract staffing. It's not just the technical staff, it's the pre-analytic staff, the phlebotomy staff, support staff, lab assistants. Staffing is the biggest issue. The Compass Group, which is 33 health systems, almost 700 hospitals that I work with, we're running about 15 to 17% vacancy in most labs. And it's probably not going to get a lot better. Over the next 5 years, people are going to have to go to more on-site training programs to build your own kind of staff and have it available. If you go to automation, everybody wants nice machines, automation. Actually, what it's fewer human touch points. We don't have the people. You've got to try and get the equipment. Even smaller facilities are looking at more automated solution, pre-analytic processing lines for specimen processing. Another area of automation that's high demand and high cost is digital pathology. You know, where does it fit? Everybody would love to have it, but it's very expensive, hard to maintain. And I don't know that the hospitals in all the facilities can afford, you know, digital pathology. It's the future, but it's a tough road financially right now. Faster processing is required due to automation. Everybody wants all the results yesterday, forever, for free, and that's not going to change. The demand of service and performance of the labs, you know, reached a pinnacle during COVID, and it hasn't backed off. And then finally, reimbursement. You know, it's hard to run a lab, but it's even harder to get paid these days. And the reduction in reimbursement through the various government agencies and the insurance programs. I mean, in the last 6-7 years, we're down about 55% reimbursement per test than we were back in, 2012, 2013, 14. I think that Pre-authorizations are way up, more molecular assays requiring greater validation and approval to be able to be offered. Very easy for insurance companies to deny payment. So what you need is a very robust revenue cycle management aspect to your operations. In the past, you had hospital operations and billing, and it wasn't very sophisticated. If you're a lab today, you need your own revenue cycle management strategy and solution. So those are the things that I think are most important today. I think another area, and maybe we'll talk on it a little bit, is value. And what's the role of the laboratory in value? Contracts are moving from fee for service to payments for value, and it's getting traction. And I think that's something that more and more labs are going to be facing as far as the reimbursement window. So over the next 5 years, there's plenty of challenges, but the big three, I think, are staffing, automation, and reimbursement, or getting paid for the services you provide.
Thank you, Stan. You brought up really good points, and I want to pose a question to Dennis as far as laboratories utilizing multiple systems, and what does it mean to have things interfaced and having one source of truth? What's your vision on these disparate systems and the integration between them in a silo-free lab data exchange world?
Well, sir, that's a good question. And, you know, coordination and the correlation and consistency of laboratory, clinical, and financial data is really a key factor to better efficiency, quality, and improved productivity. Now, lots of times I hear comments talking about systems being integrated. And in fact, they're not integrated, they're interfaced. And interfacing is not the same as integration. Interfacing requires the transmission of transactions and messages between the systems, whereas integration is all is contained in the single system. And again, they're not the same, and there are some issues with, although it's prevalent, clearly a lot of interfacing done with HL7, interfacing to instruments, which of course is required. But when you look at some of the challenges associated with interfacing relative to integration, if there's a change made in either of the systems that's interfaced, that's going to require retesting. It may require some downtime. It certainly require remapping of the system. So there's always this issue. There's also an issue of terminology. Sometimes the two systems that are interfaced don't really describe their data in the same way. So there's some inconsistencies. And another issue that can occur is if one of the systems goes down, how do you resync the data? How do you know which system is current and which system is the actual source of truth? So if you compare the two things, you know, and they both have advantages and disadvantages, integration and integration. But with regard to integration, there's basically one comprehensive system. All the data is there. You don't have a silo of financial information and a silo of clinical information, a clinical lab and anatomic, for example. You can get real-time data access throughout the system. You're assured that the data you're using is consistent and it's unambiguous, because again, it's in one system. And another factor, we'll talk about business intelligence and AI later. But one thing about having an integrated system is that your business intelligence, your business analytics can work across the realm, across the scope of data that's there, across that spectrum of both clinical and financial information. And you don't need to work on reconciling the information between, for example, an LIS and a revenue cycle management system. So there are differences, and it's important to understand that interfacing is not integration.
Thank you, Dennis. Bruce, what is your vision on the role of the LIS? Will it be constant even as new technologies become available?
That's an excellent question, Surin, and relatively easy to answer. I think the first thing we all need to understand is that lab data is the biggest bargain in healthcare today. Typically, a large health system, the budget for the labs will be about 5 or 6%, but yet lab data contributes to something like 70 or 80% of all clinical decision making. And that's because the labs have been automated for several decades. So I consider the LIS as a part of this automation of all the labs. Now, what we're seeing now is AI creeping into what I would call the subsystems, which I would define as the individual laboratories like chemistry and hematology and microbiology. AI and automation, of course, took anatomic path by storm, but it's now being deployed at the level of individual laboratories. Now, we need some kind of agent, AI agent, that oversees all of the work of all the different laboratories. In the case of most of LigoLab customers, the question is very easy to solve because LigoLab, the LIS, will provide AI support as we go forward in the future. However, for large health systems, it's a little bit more complicated because essentially for many hospitals or pathology departments, the LIS module is a portion or individual unit within the overarching EHR. And I don't want to be too pessimistic about this, but I believe that the EHR companies like Epic are very, very broad, and they have a lot of people to satisfy. And I suspect that AI will come probably first to some of the clinical hospital operations and not to the labs. So I believe there will be room in the laboratories for some kind of overarching AI presence or agent that would be take the data from all the individual laboratories and integrate it and interpret it. And this has always been the case. We've had rules in the labs for decades. So there are always rules operating at the analyzer level and the overarching total lab operation. So I don't know who's going to provide this large overarching AI agent that will oversee the work and the rules operating at all the individual laboratories. I think the IVD companies for large health systems, the IVD companies may provide this solution. That would include large companies like Beckman and of course and Roche. So I think I'm very optimistic about the future of the labs in terms of AI. We've been using rules for many decades. We will continue in that realm. And for many of you listening to this broadcast, LigoLab will provide that solution for you. That is that overarching agent that will control and interpret the data coming from the individual labs. So I'm optimistic about the future and automation in the labs.
Thank you. That's a fantastic point and it sets us up for the topic of AI. But before I dive too deep into that, I think it's really vital to discuss the curation and aggregation of lab data, because without that, you really can't build proper AI models. Professor, what's your vision on how that can improve laboratories' operations and finances?
I think Stan covered quite nicely the challenges facing lab, not to mention reduction of the payment in a severe fashion, stepping stone and bundle payment, just like what DRG is possibly, shrinking of the commercial market due to physician employment model, and then also maybe even narrowing network that I believe that current business model may have reached a strategic inflection point. But I'm going to borrow something from Bruce, what he said, optimism. Even though our industry is facing the most dangerous commoditization, I feel quite bold about the role of the clinical lab in the future state of healthcare. If we are aligning ourselves, as Stan talked about, the space of the value, if it's translated into managing clinical risk, I really think that we are moving from the sort of the notion of reactive confirmation, what the diagnosis is, to a proactive prediction what that's going to be. But we know the current P&L, we have to reduce our cost because our payment is reducing significantly. But we had to put a stepping stone in the business of the value in the space of managing both clinical and financial risk that payer, including Medicare and Medicare Advantage, is going to require and demand of us. We're not ready to that. And I think runway is about 3 to 5 years. We got to optimize the current process of the clinical lab. We got to diversify our top line so we're mitigating the risks of the changes in our reimbursement. But we really got to stand transforming, utilizing the longitudinal data, which AI could help as a stepping stone in the future model, which basically allows us to do proactive risk stratification, even at asymptomatic stage. That's going to be a requirement for value-based care.
We have a question that we received in the chat. In what areas of anatomic pathology workflow can rules and automations replace human resources? Anyone wants to answer that?
Well, clearly, I would
Understand?
say it's,
Okay.
I would say in terms of image analysis, which is now starting to hit the market in terms of approved systems, starting with prostate cancer. And there's going to be an explosion of these various packages that will interpret the images obtained in the digitization of the image.
Speaking of images, I wanted to note that all the images you're seeing on the slide deck today were generated by AI. They were all using Midjourney. So that was a little fun tidbit. Dennis, so with the discussion of AI, Dennis, how do you see artificial intelligence revolutionizing clinical laboratory workflows, particularly in the area of data analysis and diagnostics?
Well, as everyone knows, artificial intelligence is exploding. You see examples of it every day. You just mentioned the images that you're showing. There's Siri, Alexa, there's auto driving, online ads that are specifically focused to you. And I'm sure I've gotten mine already this morning, and I'll be getting more for the rest of the day. But yeah, it's exploding, and there are a lot of issues associated with its exploding, not only in healthcare, but across our whole society. But as far as AI in laboratories and in healthcare, there are a number of different application areas, if you will. One Bruce mentioned already, digital pathology, scanning slides and identifying anomalies in the slides with a high degree of accuracy is one. Another one is pattern recognition, which looking at large databases, large longitudinal databases of clinical information, being able to discern patterns that humans would not have the time or necessarily the ability to detect, and being able to point out those trends and those indicators. Another one is clinical decision support, in terms of being able to provide predictive analyses. And that also applies in as far as the laboratory is concerned, in business management. That is giving laboratory managers the insights and advice they need to operate their laboratories more effectively and efficiently. And another one that's rarely brought up, and I know we can have some more discussion about this later, because it's a big issue, is cybersecurity. That's another area. But I do want to comment on the analytics side, if I may, Surin, because if you look at business analytics and business intelligence, you look back at kind of what we have now, or what we've had in the past. And that's been descriptive data. That is, the systems will summarize raw data for interpretation. And specifically, it will describe what has happened, And it's basically basic statistics and the reports that you see, the dashboards and the graphs. So what we moved into now with artificial intelligence is a predictive model. That is, you have enough capability to be able to determine what could happen, what is likely to happen, based on the analysis of historical data. And this is using analytical tools, including statistical modeling and other algorithms. So that's very nice. Predictive is good. But I think the next step is even more important, and that's prescriptive. With artificial intelligence and machine learning, where the machine is learning from the data and the new data that it's getting to be able to alter what it suggests. And prescriptive says it's going to suggest decision options that are the most likely to optimize the outcomes. For example, prescriptive indicates what should happen or the best course of action. So this is a very powerful tool in using mathematical-based techniques, optimization, game theory, machine learning, and meta-heuristics. So there's a heck of a lot of things that are happening in AI that are going to be beneficial to the laboratory, but not without some risks. And we'll talk about those, I bet, a little bit later.
Bruce, yeah, you wanted to add some comments on that?
Sir, thank you. I look upon what Dennis just spoke about. I look upon this as reflex testing on steroids. And we've had for 2 decades, essentially reflex testing on 24-hour cycles. But I think that this is going to be compressed with AI such that the cycles will be more like 4 or 5 hours. Now, the labs will have to keep up, but I think that there will be testing to a logical endpoint in the diagnosis within a 24-hour period. Now, this is not without some risk and some political attention, because the clinicians, I think many of them, particularly the older ones, will not allow this, considering that their position to do this. But I think the younger docs are overworked and will be very happy to a set of reflex testing to a diagnosis within a 24-hour period, and AI will be greatly able to do that.
Yeah, the old guys won't be around too much longer.
Right.
Stan?
It hits home.
And where does this webinar go with that?
Right.
They will be the customer of the process.
You mentioned cost. Outside of cost, what are other current limitations and challenges in implementing AI technologies in clinical laboratories, and how can these be addressed?
Well, let me just say that I think that the average laboratory has to depend on technology from a third party because they don't have the intellectual capital of the experience to develop AI kind of tools. So what we would be doing is working with other sophisticated organizations to develop the tools and adapt them to our workflow or our environment. In other words, we'd have to go shopping for the technology, developing it, writing code and training machine learning devices, stuff like that. The average laboratory can't do that. It's too complex. It's too costly to do that from scratch. So we're going to have to be, end users from the development steps from pharma's developing it, then diagnostic companies will be developing it, and then the laboratory will be the end market user, and they'll have to buy it. And they may be able to modify it or customize it, but I don't think very many laboratories outside of 1 or 2 of the national commercial labs will have any kind of resources to devote to this kind of technology development in the next 5 years.
Well,
Coster, would you like to expand on that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to, I agree that average lab may not have the sophistication, but average lab is going to have to learn it. That's basically rule of thumb. But I'm going to go back to what Bruce just said. If the LIS needs to be the central repository of the raw material called data, that's a foundation. AI to me needs to come in when we are able to aggregate, clean, and correlate the foundation of the longitudinal view, and AI basically becomes sort of the intelligence gathering for us. Foundation has to start with can we truly aggregate, curate the data real time? Because the harnessing the real time of the lab data is the actionability. Zero latency of the data is our value proposition. But if it's going to take 6 months just to gather the data, we just lost our value proposition. Gathering, curating, correlating the fundamental foundation of the repository of data, then AI comes in the layers on top of it to tell us, okay, what do all of this means? And later on, maybe I can share an example of it, but the foundation isn't there yet. We're so fragmented when it comes to data, we can basically connect the dot and saying, this is the actionable intelligence. I don't think AI is going to help in there. I think we need to start curating that repository first, where AI wraps around it, in my opinion.
Yeah, let's go to Dennis and then Bruce next, please.
Well, I think one of the things about the use of AI, with following up on Stan's comments, that yes, unless the university is developing some things that become commercialized, I think one of the key things about the AI is going to be its ease of use. And in addition to the ease of use, the validation that it's working properly is going to be another important factor in its acceptance by the laboratory and by the healthcare community.
Bruce, would you like to dive deeper?
Yes, just very quickly, I have total confidence that the lab industry will absorb AI almost effortlessly. And in my whole career, I've seen the lab being a driver for technology, for automation and technology. So I have no qualms about this. I feel very confident because by and large, laboratory personnel and professionals are very comfortable working with automation and technology, and our industries will provide that for us.
Dennis, please.
Well, I want to touch a little, we have a bulletin on personalized medicine. And AI, I think, gives the opportunity based on, again, going back to Cosro's comments and other roundtable comments about longitudinal data. I think clearly one of the issues we have to deal with, and I think we're still having problems dealing with it today, is how do you ensure that the data that you have in your longitudinal database is validated? Because AI is only as good as the data it's going to operate on. And I'm not sure that today, and maybe this is an area where AI can help, that is to be able to look at data that's coming into the system to say, is this data inconsistent in any way? Does this data not meet, quote, the standards for that type of data element or that type of information? And I think that as a front end may be very helpful for AI to assure that data coming into databases in the future is validated as good data. You know, the old expression goes back 30 or 40 years, garbage in, garbage out. And artificial intelligence is not going to solve that if it's dealing with garbage.
Bruce, please.
I want to get a little bit even more with the science, a future of science comment here. And it's not going to happen tomorrow in terms of AI, but predictive analytics in 2 to 3 years are going to look at a patient's variation, oftentimes within a normal range, and predict based on large data what diseases patients will be developing in the future, say 10 years or 15 years hence. This is not something we need to worry about now, but predictive analytics is going to take us in that direction, and that's going to have very powerful social implications, not tomorrow, but perhaps in 5 or 10 years.
Kasra and Stan, maybe in that order, I'd love to get your input on what are your thoughts? Is it practical to have AI-driven personalization of patient reports to improve the clinical decision-making process and patient outcomes for the providers and the patient?
Is that a rhetorical question?
Well, what do you think about summarizing, helping patients instead of the patient going and Googling, you know, all of the lab input, helping the patient with the summarization and personalizing that report to them?
Let me jump in there. I think the potential of that and the functionality have great opportunities, but systems and providers of healthcare want to control information so that they are managing the patient through a process rather than the patient saying, oh, I know what the answer is and I don't need anybody now. And I think physicians, health systems, and providers want to stay with the patient stuck to them and needing them and relying on them, because that's their role and their function today. Because the sophistication of technology giving the patient the correct answer, what are they going to do with it? Okay, so they're not trained in dealing with it, and they may not be sophisticated to deal with it. And those are the challenges that systems and providers have to work with the technology companies and AI data providers to come up with some reasonable guardrails there, because giving a patient, in my opinion, giving a patient a full roadmap won't help if they don't know where the first road sign is and what to do with it. Okay, so if you want to get out of town, any road will take you there. But if you want to get to your vacation, you got to take the exact route. And usually it takes some training and some mapping. And that's the role of the providers, transforming this information into guidelines and a roadmap with the patients rather than leaving them out in the woods by themselves. So I don't think it's wrong that patients have more information and they will become more sophisticated. The younger generation is certainly technologically adaptable to this, but once again, the continuum of the aging in the population, what people at 25 can do with information and data far exceeds what most people at 70 can do. So, and there has to be some kind of normalization of a process. And I think the providers are going to be the universal translators and guides in the healthcare journey for many, many years to come.
Thank you, Stan. Khosrow?
Let's face it, AI been around since 1950s. It's the latest shiny objects. And I do agree with Stan. This may not be just technological advancement, but it's cultural change. US is actually tracking behind and not leading in this process. In other countries, including Middle East, the lab report is not a numeric value standalone. In fact, there is a page that shows trend line, that how the delta change over time, and the individual actually tracks it. So my definition of a personalized medicine is about how did the individual change compared to themselves above and beyond within the normal range. Let's take an example, AKI, creatinine. Often the value has gone up 50% within the normal range. We're not even flagging it yet until it's out of the range. That requires a change of the pathology prescriptively. What Dennis said, hey, this is actionable, do something about it now. We have to be part of the care to get to that point. That means we have to no longer be passive. We release the result, but we have to assure that there was a diagnosis that someone needed to take an action. That's a cultural transformation here, not technological transformation.
That's a great point. Thank you, Khosrow. Bruce?
Søren, can I ask you, as an aside, what inputs you gave to the system to create this image that we're looking at now? I'm wondering if this tells us a lot about you.
I think this one, the prompt was around machine learning, AI, personalization of medicine. So I took a bunch of different prompts like this, and I'm running this on the Midjourney version 5. So that's what I used to come up with this one, from what I remember. Dennis, any closing remarks on this slide before we move on?
Well, yeah, well, AI, and all of us see this. We get a lot of things directed to us that we didn't ask for, but the system knows that we are interested in.
Hmm.
So there's, and although, quote, and I'll put quotes around artificial intelligence, goes back a long ways. It isn't the artificial intelligence we have now with machine learning. It was based on Boolean logic and algorithms in the past. So we have an advantage now in that machine learning will change the algorithms and what it does based on new information that it receives. And in terms of personalized medicine, I can give you an example. My son's a psychiatrist, and as you know, or most of you know, that the drugs that are given for different symptoms vary, and their impact on patients vary significantly to the point of either making them feel better or causing them to commit suicide. So we have a lot of data, and again, assuming the longitudinal data is good, we're going to have more and more DNA information. We're going to have more genetic information. We're going to have more past history information, which should allow both the lab and clinicians to be able to say, again, this is predictive. This is the best course of action for us to take, whether it's testing or whether it's therapies, because of the information that is being analyzed and being presented to the clinicians and to the laboratorians.
Thank you. I mean, I think really to cause a major shift in the way we run laboratories, we're going to see a larger, shift in how we get paid. So it's really a world of moving from volume to value. And Costro obviously has a conference around this and a lot of thoughts on this. Although there's several good reasons to shift healthcare to value-based model, the transition will require significant changes to healthcare as we know it. So what will it take for value-based care to become the dominant form of care at Costro?
We're actually referring to this as lab-initiated care model to elevate the laboratory out of the basements, assume a seat at the table, and help design care model future that is driven by clinical intervention, clinical prevention, and cost avoidance. So the pathway of Lab 2.0, really simple, but is not easily implementable yet. But I think we're going to have to earn in every one of them. Otherwise, others are going to grab our lunch and run with it. So the pathway starts with the prevalence of the conditions that our health systems are going at risk for. Let's just say CKD is a good example. Then we basically argued that longitudinal lab data, access agnostic, how did the biomarkers of the individual, even at asymptomatic state, change that is actionable? With domain knowledge of pathology, if this was all about data, Google would have solved it 10, 15 years ago. The two basically creates a new toolbox that we begin not waiting for the order to arrive. We begin proactive risk stratifying the data that we're sitting on. We're looking for that needle in the haystack. And we're basically looking for where was the gap in care that was missed? Who's at high risk early stages? They're not in a hospital yet. They're not in an emergency room, but needs to be escalated for early care management. And lab then basically facilitating targeted intervention in early stages. But the measurement is all about improving outcome and reducing total cost. And on the outcome side, obviously is measured by, did we intervene early? Did we prevent something? And on the financial side, what were the total cost avoidance, such as readmission or hospitalization? And did we adjust the risk, such as HCC and HEDIS score? So if I can just conclude with a case that we're about to submit that manuscript into National Kidney Foundation, we all know that CKD is a huge prevalence with comorbidity. Roughly about 37 million suffer from that. 95% of these conditions are missed within the primary care. That's what we will actually indicate by our study. And by the time that the individual reaches the stage 4, the individual is going to be on dialysis. Lifespan of the dialysis is between 1 to 5 years. Here's the beauty. what the lab really can do. Within the first 3 stages, asymptomatic stage, lab is the essential part, measuring the very basic biomarkers of the lab that are telling us something, but we're not catching it. So we basically concluded, this is what the headline are going to say, roughly, these are the lives been touched, not the potential one, roughly about 340,000 Americans that either miscoded, misdiagnosed, and or in danger of not putting on dialysis early enough. And here's the financial side. We're estimating about $2.1 billion, either in HEDIS miscoding or HCC, that could be a leverage between the clinical lab and a payer, especially in IDN stage. If we're talking about new payment, new value proposition, and risk management, lab is sitting on that raw material. Basically follows the slide that we just talked about. And CKD is just a starting place. That's a new business model, requires a different customer, and really requires and demands a different payment. How do we get paid for risk in the future? We haven't evolved that yet.
Thank you, Castro. We have a question from the attendees, and maybe I'll propose it to you, Stan. What can my lab do today to prepare for this major shift to value-based reimbursement?
Okay, it's a great question, and many of us are still struggling with a clean answer, but let me give you my best advice at the moment. Get closer to the patient.
Yep.
The lab, many years has been relegated to kind of the basement or kind of a commodity. Lab work has drawn, results come back, nobody ever sees the lab. Get closer to the patient. What does that mean? It means take an active role in helping drive the patient through the health system and the provider network efficiently and cost effectively and quickly. The big mantra is length of stay, length of stay, length of stay. Every hospital is trying to cut the length of stay. So what the lab needs to do, number one, you have to have the lowest possible cost, okay, per test. You have to be efficient. You have to be automated. You got to get paid so you don't have a lot of risk loss. And you have to have the right staffing combination to keep the cost down. The second thing is efficiency. Drive the patient through the system quickly. If that means point of care instrumentation, I've always thought, well, the central lab, it's much cheaper, it's this and that. But COVID changed my mind. Having COVID testing at a molecular level at a hospital 2.5 hours away was very efficient compared to, half the cost going to the core lab, but 12 to 16 hour delay in care and therapies for the patient and or special infection control, isolation, moon suits and things like that in the emergency department. So I think, embrace it, make it a good business analytic decision and participate. All the hospitals and the health systems are working towards contracting. Get involved, get a seat at the table, work with your data analytic people and your financial people that are doing the contracting. But first of all, you got to know your costs. You got to be efficient in your cost per test, but then you have to raise your hand and say, hey, let me help you on the lab side and work with the data and the contracting people because they don't understand what the lab is and the value that the lab might bring. So those are the things that you can do today and over the next year or two and make a difference.
Bruce, please.
Stan, is getting closer to the patient, is that going to cause friction within the system with a clinician saying that's our job, that's not the lab's job?
No, I don't mean like standing at the bedside and, but the idea of having some of the things working with the chief medical officer and the medical director of, let's say, internal medicine around example would be the kidney markers that Khosrow just talked about. Very, very easy to get involved. And it doesn't mean you're going to be sitting on the end of the bed with the patient waiting for the clinician. What you're going to be doing is be proactive and pick up some of these markers and pick up these standards of care and help champion them and make sure that the lab is trained and that the lab information system flag these things appropriately and bring the attention to the medical officers and the nursing officers of the systems. Not just being left in the basement and once in a while they remember the lab because of COVID. You need to be a little more active than that.
Dennis, you wanted to expand on that?
Yeah, I think, and this goes back a ways. One of the reasons the lab is often unappreciated overall with regard to a health system is basically the lab has a unidirectional link to patient care. That is, the lab takes these tests, does the tests, gets the results, and they send those out. But the lab rarely finds out specifically the outcome. So here's the cause. You've determined that, you've sent out results to the clinicians. Theoretically, they take actions, and 70%, it's been quoted, of clinical decisions are based on lab data. But rarely does the lab ever have any follow-through that says, because we provided these results, going back to Khosrow's comments about preventing, for example, doing dialysis. The labs don't get the feedback they need, I think, to really be able to establish what benefits actually took place because of the data that the lab provided. It's unidirectional. They don't get that feedback that says, because you came up with these results, these good analyses, the patient was saved, or the length of stay was reduced, or the morbidity was reduced, whatever. So the unidirectional nature of the lab, I think, has been a problem for it for a long time.
That's true. I have thoughts on that.
Maybe piggyback on what Stan just talked about, getting out and having a seat with value-based care. We need to advance ourselves to a level that no health system should ever sign a value-based care contract without lab's input. And often they already have the intelligence in their hand on the outreach, which we need to retire that phrase. And that's the intelligence should be fed whether the value-based care agreement to be signed or not. That to me is the most sacred ground that we have got to be in. Number two, I do agree with the Stan and regarding the question that Bruce just talked about. I honestly do not see a friction between clinical lab pathology and physicians, not to mention, especially with primary care. Lab is a catalyst to unleash the values of population health, but it puts the primary care on top of its game, especially now that we're into the telehealth. To me, that's just another reactive mechanism if we don't put intelligence around it. It's just, instead of going to bricks and mortar, you're now Zoom calling. If we don't put that environment with this value that on the slide we're talking about, putting the focus of the physician where to focus and where not to focus, we're going to put them on top of their game. And the last piece, in my opinion, we need to start talking about just a test and start talking about the change in a test, which is basically that longitudinal data, even within the normal range. It really is no longer about a test, and we may not get paid for a test in the future anyway. I think we need to embrace the longitudinal view as the holy grail of laboratory medicine.
Thank you. Bruce, would you
I would
like
just
to add
like
some
to,
closing?
yeah, I'd like to just slightly extend Khosrow's remarks about longitudinal database. And he kept saying earlier and earlier diagnosis of chronic kidney disease. The logical extension of that is the diagnosis of pre-disease, probably on a community basis. And that's, we're not going to see that for a decade or more. But what that means is that a lot of our drugs will have to be retested for pre-disease as opposed to clinically manifest disease, and that's going to really turn healthcare on its axis.
Yes.
Wow, what a fascinating discussion. If there aren't any questions, we're getting close to the top of the hour. I want to make sure we're respecting everyone's time. So yeah, we reached the conclusion of our enlightening roundtable and discussing the future of clinical laboratories. This might, we might entice to do some more of these. We'd love your feedback on future topics of webinars as well. And I'd like to take a moment to express my deepest gratitude to our esteemed speakers and our attendees for your invaluable contribution and active participation. Thank you all. We are really looking forward to learning more on how we can help the greater community and the industry with topics that will drive more value. And we're truly fortunate to have this opportunity to learn from you and the wisdom that this roundtable brings. So to our attendees, thank you again for your curiosity and diverse perspectives you brought to this conversation. Your questions and comments have fostered a stimulating and dynamic exchange of ideas. As we move forward, let us continue to collaborate and innovate, harnessing the potential of technology, AI, personalized medicine to shape the future of clinical laboratories and ultimately improve patient outcomes. The insights and the connections we've gained through this roundtable will undoubtedly be the contribution to our collective efforts in achieving this goal. So once again, thank you all for being part of this insightful roundtable. We hope to see you at the future events and wish you the best in your endeavors to advance the field of clinical laboratory industry. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.